Today's story starts right up where the last one left off. Some of them joined him, this is St. Paul, and became believers, including Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. And then it continues. This is Acts chapter 18, verses 1 through 3 that I'm going to read. After this, after preaching to these people in the Areopagus, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they worked together. By trade, they were tent makers. Every Sabbath he would argue in the synagogue and would try and convince Jews and Greeks. And then this continues, just to give you some more context here. This is chapter 18, verse 24 in the book of Acts. Now there came to Ephesus a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria. He was an eloquent man, well versed in the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord. He spoke with burning enthusiasm and taught accurately the things concerning Jesus, though he only knew the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained the way of God to him more accurately. And when he wished to cross over to Achaia, the believers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples to welcome him. And then it continues on. I bring this up because an important thing happens here that you might not notice, something that actually happens routinely in the church and something that happens routinely in history, though we don't always have a record of it. A woman is correcting a man on his preaching. Some folks would have you believe that there's no examples of women preaching in the Bible. That is flatly false. Women preach all the time in the Bible, and this is one of those examples where we have an account of Priscilla correcting Apollos on this, and we have other accounts of Priscilla preaching as well. This is not something that was just for men in the Bible. Priscilla is actually mentioned lots of times in a variety of different sources. She is mentioned in Acts multiple times. She's mentioned in Romans. She's mentioned in Corinthians. She's mentioned also in 2 Timothy. St. Paul thought that she was certainly a worthy Christian and mentions her routinely throughout all of his letters, and in his travels he's continually referring back to Priscilla and her wife, or her husband, Aquila. One of the other remarkable things about this couple is that they're almost always seen as equals. We're always mentioning them together, Priscilla and Aquila. And that was something that was not very common. Women were not considered equal to men. That was one of the early hallmarks of Christianity, was that, as the Apostle Paul writes, there's neither Jew nor Greek, nor slave, nor free, nor man, nor woman. None of these different titles that we have, none of these different parts of our identity hold status. Rather, instead, what is important is that we're followers of Christ, that we're equal in that we can shed those harmful different ways that we discriminate against each other, still come with our full identity, but also with a new sort of identity of Christian, where we are equal to one another. Priscilla is certainly an equal to Aquila, and I think many people would argue would be one of the preeminent preachers and missionaries that we have featured in the New Testament. We know that she was a missionary because she's mentioned reaching out to a lot of these different communities. That's something that probably is not that remarkable to us now. However, this story has been kind of hidden over the course of history. Anytime that Christians are trying to suppress women's ability to preach, this story is not talked about, or they kind of twist it in a way to make sure that women aren't allowed to preach. However, you can read it plain as day. Priscilla was preaching, and St. Paul approved of this, and the early church approved of this. She was one of the early Christian missionaries, and for her witness, we certainly give thanks. Also for the witness of her husband, Aquila, as well. With that, we conclude our series on women in the book of Acts. If you enjoyed this, feel free to leave a comment. If you'd like me to cover something else, maybe women in different books of the Bible, or maybe men in different books of the Bible, or other characters, feel free to leave a comment. I would love to hear your suggestions for what we should cover next.